You've been told the Great Wall of China is visible from space. You've probably repeated it yourself. Teachers say it. Tour guides confirm it. Documentaries frame shots with Earth curving beneath astronauts who supposedly gaze down at this singular human achievement threading across continents. There's just one problem. It's not true. Never was. Astronauts have tried. They've looked. They've photographed entire hemispheres and found highways, airports, cities glowing at night. But the wall? Invisible. Too narrow, too irregular, too camouflaged by the terrain it was designed to merge with. Even China's first astronaut, Yang Liwei, admitted he couldn't see it. The myth persists because it sounds right. Because we want monuments to transcend their physicality. Because if something took that much effort, surely the universe itself must acknowledge it. But here's what that myth reveals. If we can be this wrong about something so famous, so studied, so visited by millions every year, what else have we misunderstood? Not just about the wall. About why it exists at all. We believe easily because repetition works. A teacher tells a classroom. That classroom grows up and fills museums, writes travel blogs, produces television shows. The wall becomes shorthand for human ambition. Postcards frame it against mountains. Documentaries use sweeping drone shots. It becomes the thing we think we know. But tourism and education prefer simplicity. A wall keeps people out. An emperor built it. It stretches forever. These aren't lies exactly. They're reductions. Convenient narratives that fit into 60-second explanations and don't require uncomfortable follow-up questions. We've turned something vast and strange into something manageable, understandable, which means we've stopped actually looking at it. The problem isn't the wall. It's that we've been trained to see monuments instead of systems, symbols instead of solutions. We look at the stones and miss the thinking behind them. We photograph the surface and ignore the invisible infrastructure that makes the surface possible. We celebrate the length without understanding the logic. And in doing so, we've created a cultural blind spot so large that entire civilizations could hide inside it. So let's change the question. Not how tall is it? Not how long? Not how many died building it? Those are tourist questions. The real question is this. What did it actually need to do? Because the answer isn't what you expect. The wall wasn't meant to stop armies. Not entirely. Walls don't stop determined invasions. Ladders exist. Ropes exist. Tunnels exist. History is full of impregnable fortifications that fell anyway. Hadrian's Wall didn't stop the Picts. The Maginot Line didn't stop the Germans. Concrete and steel fail when human will is strong enough. So if the wall wasn't an absolute barrier, what was it? A delay mechanism. A signal system. A logistical choke point. A psychological weapon. It was designed to slow enemies down just long enough for messages to travel faster than horses. To force invaders into predictable routes where defenders held every advantage. To make conquest so expensive, so exhausting, so uncertain that it wasn't worth attempting. The wall didn't need to be insurmountable. It needed to be annoying. Persistently, strategically, unbearably annoying. It needed to turn warfare from a sprint into a marathon, knowing that marathons favor the prepared. And here's what shocks modern engineers. It's still standing. Not just sections restored for tourists. The deep interior pieces. The forgotten stretches that haven't seen maintenance in centuries. Structures that by all rights should have collapsed under their own weight generations ago. Modern concrete degrades in decades. Steel rusts. Highways crack. Bridges require constant intervention. Yet portions of the wall, built with tools we'd consider primitive, endure stresses they were never designed to withstand. Earthquakes that leveled cities left the wall fractured but functional. Floods that rewrote river valleys couldn't wash it away. Landslides that buried entire villages somehow flowed around sections of the wall like water around a stone. Time itself seems to have underestimated it. which raises an uncomfortable question for civilizations that pride themselves on technological superiority. What did they know that we've forgotten? What calculations did they make that we no longer bother with? What patience did they exercise that we've abandoned in favor of quarterly reports and election cycles? The builders didn't think in quarters or fiscal years. They didn't optimize for speed. They didn't cut corners to meet deadlines. They built as if future generations would judge every decision. And here's what's strange about that. It's the opposite of how we build now. We build for right now. For this decade. For the lifespan of a mortgage. Planned obsolescence isn't a flaw in modern construction. It's a feature. We design failure into our structures because failure means replacement and replacement means profit. But the wall's architects operated under a completely different logic. They assumed the structure would outlive empires, outlive languages, outlive the reasons it was built. So they didn't just build strong. They built for eternity, knowing they'd never see the result. That's not engineering. That's faith disguised as stone. That's a civilization making a promise to the future without expecting anything in return. And that kind of thinking is almost incomprehensible to us now. But the secret isn't the stone. That's what throws people. We see granite blocks fitted so precisely you can't slip a blade between them and assume that's where the strength comes from. It's not. Stone is compression. It resists being crushed. But structures fail in tension. They fail when materials pull apart, when joints separate, when water freezes in cracks and expands like a slow explosion, when the ground beneath them shifts and the rigid becomes the broken. The wall should have shattered along those fault lines centuries ago. Except it didn't, because the most important material isn't visible. It's not the stone you photograph. It's what holds the stone together. And that material came from the most ordinary place imaginable. Not from deep mines or rare quarries. From the fields. From the kitchens. From the daily rhythm of agricultural life that surrounded the builders on all sides. Rice. Specifically, sticky rice. Boiled, mashed, mixed with limestone to create a mortar that modern chemists are still trying to replicate. It sounds absurd. It sounds like folklore. The kind of thing someone made up to make the wall seem more exotic, more mystical, more connected to ancient wisdom that exists only in our imaginations. Except it's real. The mortar contains amylopectin, a polysaccharide that forms an organic-inorganic composite stronger than the limestone it binds. It's self-healing. When microcracks form, moisture activates the starches, which swell and seal the damage. It's flexible enough to absorb seismic shocks without shattering. It's so durable that modern demolition crews prefer to work around it rather than through it. They've broken jackhammers trying to remove sections of the wall. They've dulled diamond-tip saw blades. The wall has survived this long not despite its simplicity, but because of it. The builders used what they had. And what they had turned out to be better than what we have now. Better than our chemical adhesives. Better than our polymer-reinforced concrete. Better because it was designed to work with nature instead of against it. Which brings us to the legend. Because when something lasts this long, when it defies expectations this completely, people need explanations. They need stories. So the myths grow. Bodies mixed into the mortar. Ghosts haunting the parapet. Curses on anyone who removes a stone. Dragons sleeping beneath the foundations. The tears of widows watering the construction. These stories serve a purpose. They make the inexplicable human. They transform engineering into mythology. They give meaning to suffering. And there was suffering. Hundreds of thousands of laborers died during construction. Starvation, exposure, accidents, disease. Entire villages conscripted and never returned. Families destroyed. Generations lost. That pain is real. That cost is documented. But the legends that grew from it are not. No bodies were mixed into the wall. Structurally, it makes no sense. Organic material decomposes. Creates voids. It weakens integrity. It invites pests and accelerates decay. The wall endures because of what was put into it, not who. The myths confuse cause and effect. They see death and assume it must have contributed to the result. But death was the cost, not the method. This is where we have to separate cruelty from pragmatism. The wall was built under brutal conditions. Forced labor, impossible quotas, expendable lives. That's the cost of imperial ambition. That's what happens when emperors decide their legacy matters more than the present suffering of their subjects. But the engineering itself was cold logic. Decisions made not by tyrants but by builders solving problems. Where to place foundations so they wouldn't shift. How to orient walls to prevailing winds so they wouldn't erode. Which materials bonded best in which climate. How to account for temperature fluctuations across seasons and centuries. These weren't cruel choices. They were technical ones. The wall stands because engineers made smart decisions, not because emperors made ruthless ones. The two are connected by history but not by necessity. We can acknowledge the human cost without romanticizing it, without pretending suffering made the structure stronger, without turning tragedy into some kind of mystical ingredient that justified the outcome. And that structure changes, completely, depending on where you are. In the mountains, the wall is stone. Massive blocks quarried locally and hauled into place by teams using wooden rollers, ropes, and raw determination. But cross into the desert and stone becomes a luxury. It's not available. It can't be transported economically. So the builders switched. Rammed earth, compacted sand and gravel layered like sedimentary rock, and compressed until it became nearly as hard as concrete. In some sections, they used tamarisk branches woven into lattices and packed with clay, creating a composite structure that flexed with wind instead of resisting it. In other areas, they incorporated fired bricks when kilns were accessible. Whatever was available, whatever worked, whatever could be extracted or manufactured locally without requiring supply lines that would collapse under their own logistics. The wall isn't one thing. It's thousands of localized solutions to thousands of local problems. A continuous structure built with discontinuous method. And that's the genius. The wall adapts. It doesn't impose a single design on diverse landscape. It becomes part of the landscape, uses the landscape, disappears into it when necessary. Because sometimes the wall doesn't want to be seen. We think of fortifications as statements. Visible, imposing, broadcasting strength, reminding enemies of the power they're challenging. But visibility is a weakness. It tells your enemy exactly where you are, exactly where to concentrate force, exactly how to plan their approach. So in certain stretches, the wall goes quiet. It follows ridgelines instead of cutting across them. It uses natural barriers instead of replacing them. Cliff faces become walls. Rivers become moats. Ravines become impassable gaps that require no construction at all. It becomes harder to attack not because it's stronger, but because it's harder to find. Because it blends. Because it refuses to announce itself. This is defense as misdirection. The wall doesn't always stop invaders. Sometimes it just makes them go somewhere else. Somewhere more predictable. Somewhere defenders are already waiting with prepared positions and stockpiled supplies. And when invaders did come, the wall didn't just resist. It deceived. False gates led into killing zones where attackers found themselves trapped between inner and outer walls with defenders raining projectiles from above. Towers that looked defensive were actually offensive platforms designed to project force outward, not shelter inward. Narrow passages forced cavalry to dismount, turning mobile warfare into grinding sieges where numbers meant less than position. Some sections were deliberately weakened, creating attractive targets that led into carefully prepared ambushes. The wall wasn't passive. It was an active participant in battle. It shaped how conflicts unfolded. Invaders who studied the wall, who thought they understood its weaknesses, found themselves funneled into trap. Found their supply lines stretched beyond sustainability. found that what looked like the easy route was anything but. The wall fought back not with soldiers, but with geometry, with patience, with the knowledge that time favors the defender, with the understanding that an enemy making predictable choices is an enemy already defeated. But here's something stranger. The wall protects itself, not through maintenance, through biology. Lichen grows in the mortar joint. Roots from hardy plants weave through cracks. Moss carpets the northern faces. We see this as decay, as nature reclaiming human arrogance, as proof that nothing built by humans can truly last. But recent studies suggest something else. The organic matter stabilizes the structure. It holds moisture during droughts, preventing the mortar from drying out and crumbling. It absorbs impact during storms, cushioning the stone against thermal expansion and contraction. It prevents erosion by binding surface particles together. The wall has developed an immune system, a living layer that repairs minor damage before it becomes catastrophic. What we call ruin is actually adaptation. The wall has learned to survive without us. It has become a hybrid structure, half human construction and half natural formation. And perhaps that was always the intention. Perhaps the builders knew that true permanence requires surrender, requires allowing the structure to evolve beyond its original form. And it was never just a wall, it was a network. Watchtowers weren't defensive positions. They were nodes in a communication system. Smoke signals during the day, fire at night. Different colors meant different threat. Different patterns meant different urgencies. A single tower spotting enemy movement could relay that information across hundreds of miles in hours. Faster than any messenger. Faster than any army. The wall wasn't a barrier to be manned. It was a sensor array. An early warning system that turned distance into advantage. By the time invaders reached the wall in force, defenders had already mobilized. Supplies had been moved. Reinforcements had been deployed. Civilians had been evacuated. Fields had been burned. Wells had been poisoned. The wall didn't win battles. It won the time before battles, which is often enough, which is sometimes everything, because wars aren't won by the strongest army. They're won by the army that's ready when the other one isn't. But no engineering can fix human failure. The wall held for centuries, not because it was impregnable, because it was maintained. Because commanders stayed loyal, because soldiers stayed vigilant, because the empire that built it remained strong enough to justify the enormous expense of keeping it functional. But vigilance fades, resources run thin, empires weaken from within before they fall from without. And when that happens, the wall doesn't fail. It's opened, betrayed, abandoned, sold. The strongest gate in the world means nothing if someone hands over the key. The wall fell not to ladders or battering rams. It fell to exhaustion, to corruption, to the simple human decision that defending it wasn't worth it anymore. To commanders who decided their personal survival mattered more than their oath. To soldiers who hadn't been paid in months. To bureaucrats who sold passage to the highest bidder. The wall's weakness was never structural. It was political. It was human. And no amount of sticky rice mortar could fix that. Which brings us back to that original myth. The wall is visible from space. We wanted that to be true because it confirmed something we needed to believe. That human effort, if sustained long enough, becomes transcendent, becomes permanent, becomes worthy of cosmic recognition. But the wall teaches a different lesson. It was never one thing. Never just a wall. It was a communication network, a supply route, a psychological barrier, an economic statement, a symbol of unity, and a tool of oppression. It was all of those things simultaneously, and we miss that when we reduce it to a simple stone barrier. We miss the thinking, the adaptation, the uncomfortable truth that it worked not because it was strong, but because it was smart. Because it accepted limitations and turned them into strategy. Because it didn't try to be perfect, it tried to be functional. And functional doesn't need to be visible from space to matter. The wall is still teaching us, not about how to build walls, about how to think about problems, about systems instead of objects, about long-term thinking in a short-term world, about adapting to conditions instead of forcing conditions to adapt, about accepting that permanence isn't about resisting change but accommodating it. We look at the wall and see the past, but the wall is looking back at us, asking questions we're not ready to answer. How do we build for generations we'll never meet? How do we solve problems that outlast our solutions? How do we create systems that don't just endure but evolve? How do we balance immediate needs with long-term consequences? How do we make decisions that our descendants will thank us for instead of curse us for? The Great Wall of China isn't visible from space, but maybe that was never the point. Maybe the point is that something can be extraordinary without being supernatural, effective without being perfect, ancient without being primitive. The wall stands not because it transcends human limits, but because it accepts them, works within them, turns limitations into strategy. And that's a lesson worth more than visibility. It's worth understanding. If this kind of deep historical thinking appeals to you, if you want to keep questioning what you thought you knew about the ancient world, there's more to explore. The wall is just the beginning. Every monument hides a system. Every legend hides a choice. Every structure we think we understand is asking us to look closer. Keep looking. Keep questioning. Because the past isn't dead. It's not even past. It's still here, still functioning, still waiting for us to see what was always visible. Just not from space.